Welcome to another night, another gentle journey into the quiet corners of history. Tonight, we do not chase kings, nor march with armies, nor measure the weight of empires. Instead, we listen to the softer, often forgotten stories, to the lives of women on the frontier, whose strength and care quietly shaped the world around them. Close your eyes now, breathe slowly, deeply, and let the noise of the day fade away. The year is 1876. The place, a small mining town called Silver Creek. Wooden buildings lean together against the wind, dust drifts along uneven streets, and the faint glow of lamps spills from windows, lighting the way for stories that have long waited to be told. Above the saloon, in narrow rooms called cribs, women live, work, and endure, their quiet courage holding together the fragile pulse of a rough town. Tonight, we follow one such woman, Martha Blackwood, who here will be known simply as Martha, as she steps into a new life, into a world that demands resilience, and yet offers the chance to belong. The stagecoach rolled slowly over the wooden planks of the town street, dust rising in gentle clouds, catching the fading light. Martha stepped down, her boots crunching softly, her breath curling in the cool mountain air. Boston felt impossibly far away, the city of gas lamps and polished floors, of promises broken and dreams abandoned. Here, she carried only a single name, Martha. The saloon ahead glowed warmly, spilling light onto the dusty street. Faint piano notes floated upward, accompanied by laughter and shuffling boots. Above it, the narrow staircase led to the cribs, rooms small and fragile, yet full of life and endurance. Every step toward that staircase felt heavy with uncertainty, yet lightened by the quiet hope that survival might also bring belonging. The crib was smaller than Martha imagined. Walls thin, floorboards creaking beneath every movement. A crooked chair leaned against one corner. The bed, thin and worn, seemed almost too small to contain her. A single lantern flickered softly on the table, its shadows moving gently like dancers across the wall. Martha set her bundle down, breathing slowly, letting the sense of dust, candle wax, and faint perfume of other women settle around her. This was no place for fancy dreams. It was a place for endurance, for learning to carry oneself through the chill of the night, through thin walls, and the quiet weight of the outside world. Suddy was waiting, her presence calm yet commanding. Dark eyes, sharp as winter shadows, swept over Martha, measuring, observing, understanding everything at once. "No drinking while you work," she said softly. "No stealing. No falling in love. The rules are simple. Break them, and you will break yourself." Martha nodded, feeling the truth settle slowly in her chest. Suddy was more than an employer. She was the shield, the guide, the protector, the quiet force keeping danger at bay in a world that offered little mercy. The first customer arrived quietly, his coat smelling faintly of coal. $2 changed hands. Up the narrow stairs, into the crib, and the night began. Martha closed her eyes, recalling Boston only for a fleeting moment. Here, there was no past, no longing, only presence. The work was simple, transactional, yet it demanded complete attention. Afterwards, she washed her face, staring at a reflection she barely recognized. Gone was the woman who had once dreamed of love or safety. Now she was Martha, a name to survive with, a name to carry like armor through nights that might otherwise be cruel. Later, when the piano faded into silence and the saloon emptied, Daisy appeared at the door, holding a worn, clean dress, placing it gently on the bed. "You'll need this more than I do," she whispered. Pearl offered quiet advice, warning of rough men, sharing lessons learned from experience. Charlotte brought a cup of water, sitting with Martha in silence, allowing trembling hands to still, allowing fear to soften into cautious trust. Martha realized the truth of the crib. Survival was never solitary. It was woven from small, quiet acts of care, from whispers of warning, from the gentle touch of another saying without words, "I see you. You are not alone." For the first time, she felt a fragile thread of belonging begin to wrap slowly, softly, around her heart. The morning light seeped softly through the thin curtains of the crib. The air carried the faint aroma of soap, dust, and the lingering scent of yesterday's smoke. The town outside began to stir, shuffled boots on wooden streets, soft laughter, the distant clang of metal from the blacksmith's hammer. Martha rose slowly, letting her body adjust to the rhythm of the room. Downstairs, the saloon hummed quietly, piano notes slipping upward in uneven waves, mixing with murmurs and the shuffle of early risers. Suddy moved silently among the rooms, her presence calm but unyielding. She checked each woman, offering advice, a nod, a quiet caution, ensuring that the delicate pulse of the house did not falter. Every day followed its rhythm. Wake, wash, dress, prepare. Each coin earned, each rule observed, was a small victory, a lifeline strung through the quiet storm of the frontier. Martha listened to it all, absorbing the rhythm. She felt herself sinking with the heartbeat of the brothel, learning to move gently with its pulse, knowing that every step, every moment could shape survival. Suddy's words were soft but steady, etched with experience. She leaned close and whispered, her voice a quiet echo of wisdom. Know your client, keep your purse close, and never forget, your health is your first protection. She demonstrated, patiently, the subtle movements, the careful guarding of money, the signs to watch for in a man's eyes, the ways to navigate fear without panic. Martha listened intently, letting every word sink slowly into her mind. It was like learning a secret language, a code spoken only by those who survived the nights, whose knowledge of danger and kindness was a shield stronger than any weapon. In these quiet moments, Martha began to feel a strange comfort. The crib was not only a place of work, it was a place of learning, of quiet mastery, where women passed down strength like a soft, invisible cloak. Through the small window, Martha watched Silver Creek wake. Miners carrying pails, blacksmiths hammering, and the occasional traveler wandering lost in dust and sun. The town felt unfinished, fragile, buildings leaning slightly as if to hold each other up. Yet in its roughness, there was life. And slowly, Martha began to understand that the brothel, though hidden above the saloon, was part of that life, a quiet thread connecting to the rhythm of the town. Families walked slowly, wives holding children close, and she noticed the wary stares of townspeople passing by. Here, she realized, survival was not only in the crib. It was in understanding the town, the people, the silent connections that kept a small, fragile community alive. One evening, as the sky deepened into shades of indigo, Martha heard whispers in the hallway, soft but urgent. Daisy and Pearl spoke of dangers. The Barlow brothers, known for violence, and Foreman Tucker, whose temper could cut sharper than a pickaxe. They shared their knowledge quietly, carefully, not to frighten, but to arm Martha with the unseen tools of survival. Each whispered name, each caution, was a thread in a protective web, woven from memory, experience, and the unspoken understanding that in this world, knowledge could be the difference between safety and harm. Martha listened, absorbing every warning, feeling the weight of the world outside, yet comforted by the shared vigilance of those who had come before her. As the weeks passed, Martha began to feel the first threads of connection forming. Daisy shared clothing, Pearl offered advice, and Charlotte simply sat quietly, allowing Martha's hands to still, her thoughts to settle. The crib became more than a room. It was a sanctuary, fragile yet powerful, where small acts of care, whispers of guidance, and gentle touches built a sense of belonging. Martha lay down that night, listening to the steady breaths of her companions, and allowed herself to drift into sleep, feeling for the first time that she was part of something larger than herself, a fragile, enduring sisterhood in the heart of the frontier. The mornings grew longer, softer. As Martha learned to move with the subtle rhythm of the crib, the air smelled faintly of soap, dust, and the lingering warmth of shared bodies. Sheets were washed, brushes ran through tangled hair, and women moved quietly through the small spaces, each step measured, careful, protective. Martha began to notice the gentle, almost invisible ways the women cared for each other. A word of warning, a small bundle of clean clothes, a soft smile passed down a hallway. These tiny acts carried the weight of survival, and slowly, the warmth of belonging. Suddy called Martha to her side one late morning. Her voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of experience. "You must learn to see the world in shadows and light," she said. "Some things are loud, easy to notice. Others, quiet, hidden, but just as dangerous." She demonstrated how to keep money safe, how to read the fleeting expression in a man's eyes, how to navigate both kindness and threat with balance and poise. Martha listened, absorbing every movement, every whispered tip. It was not just work, it was preparation, a secret education in endurance, courage, and quiet mastery. From the small window of the crib, Martha watched Silver Creek wake fully. Smoke curled from chimneys, miners trudged toward shafts, and the general store's bell tinkled softly as doors opened. The town was rough, unfinished, and unpredictable, but it was alive in its own stubborn way. She realized the brothel was not isolated, it was part of this life, a quiet, steady pulse connecting to the wider rhythm. Families passed on uneven streets, children clutched to parents, and Martha began to see herself not just as a worker upstairs, but as part of the town's fragile, intricate weave. One evening, Daisy leaned close to Martha with a soft smile. "Watch him carefully," she whispered. "Not every man can be trusted, not every coin is safe." Pearl added a quiet caution. "Some foremen are gentle, some are harsh. Learn the difference." Charlotte, ever patient, hummed softly while mending a tear in Martha's sleeve. The crib was alive with quiet knowledge, shared without alarm, an unspoken pact of survival, care, and vigilance. Martha began to see the wisdom in silence, the strength in whispered warnings, the subtle bonds that held them together in the fragile night. Martha faced her first truly difficult night with a mixture of fear and focus. A rough man entered, heavy with suspicion and impatience. She remembered Suddy's words, the gestures, the careful precautions. She moved slowly, deliberately, every step measured, every breath controlled. When the night ended, Martha felt a tremor of quiet pride. She had survived, not through brute strength, but through observation, patience, and calm resolve. The crib had become her classroom, and each challenge a lesson etched softly into her growing courage. Days blended gently into weeks, and Martha began to understand the complex, silent rules of the brothel. There were formal rules, spoken aloud by Suddy. No drinking, no stealing, no attachments. And there were informal rules, learned through quiet observation. When to speak, when to remain silent, how to protect oneself without drawing attention, how to read the room as if it were a living map of danger and safety. Martha realized that mastery of these rules was not about submission. It was about survival, dignity, and learning to carry oneself gracefully through a world that was rough, unpredictable, and often cruel. Charlotte brought Martha a cup of tea one cold morning. Pearl shared a small loaf of bread, and Daisy handed her a hand-sewn scarf for the chill nights. The crib became more than a workplace. It became a sanctuary where trust was earned slowly, where small acts of kindness could weigh heavier than gold. Martha felt a sense of warmth she had not known since leaving Boston. She began to see the women not as colleagues, but as sisters, guardians, and teachers, in a world that offered little mercy outside their small walls. Through the narrow window, Martha watched life unfold. Men carried tools, miners whispered plans, and children ran barefoot along dusty streets. The town was small, yet complex, every action and every glance connecting like threads in a fragile tapestry. She realized the brothel was not apart from the town, but entwined with it. The women above the saloon quietly influenced life below, their presence a steady, invisible heartbeat in the small, stubbornly alive town of Silver Creek. One evening, Pearl whispered of trouble. The Barlow brothers were seen drinking near the outskirts. and Foreman Tucker's temper had been warned about in hushed tones. Every whispered warning was a tool, a shield against harm. Martha listened closely, memorizing names, faces, and signs. Danger could appear without notice, but knowledge, vigilance, and solidarity were quiet weapons that could protect her and all the women in ways more subtle than brute force. As the first month drew to a close, Martha lay on her bed, listening to the steady, soft breathing of the women around her. The crib had become a place of fragile comfort, where whispered advice, shared clothing, and small gestures bound them together in silent solidarity. For the first time, Martha allowed herself to feel safe. Not entirely, for the world outside was unpredictable, but enough to drift slowly into sleep, wrapped in the warmth of friendship, wisdom, and shared survival. And in that quiet night, the heartbeat of the brothel and the town merged, a rhythm of endurance, care, and belonging that carried gently into dreams. The first light of dawn stretched lazily across the wooden floorboards of the crib, painting soft, golden lines over blankets and worn furniture. Martha stirred slowly, listening to the faint murmur of the town below. The saloon's piano notes drifted upward, uneven but comforting, mixing with the soft clatter of dishes, the scraping of boots, and the distant murmur of voices greeting the new day. Suddy moved among the rooms with practiced ease, her presence calm yet commanding, checking each woman, offering advice, encouragement, or a warning when necessary. Martha felt the rhythm of the crib settle into her bones. It was a rhythm of care, of survival, of quiet endurance, a heartbeat beneath the roughness of the frontier that could carry her safely through the day. Suddy beckoned Martha closer that morning, her dark eyes softening slightly as she spoke. "Here, your strength is your shield," she said. "Your intelligence, your awareness, your ability to move quietly, watch carefully, these are your most important tools." She demonstrated, slowly and deliberately, how to manage clients, protect coins, and guard one's body and mind. Every movement, every instruction, was like a small thread being woven into the fabric of survival. Martha absorbed it all, her mind quiet, her senses alert. She understood, with a soft, sinking certainty, that endurance was both an art and a science, a careful balance of patience, knowledge, and gentle courage. From the window, Martha observed the town's slow awakening. Miners trudged toward shafts, carrying pails and whispered conversations. The blacksmith's hammer rang out across the uneven streets, and the general store's bell tinkled as doors opened to early customers. The town was rough, unfinished, yet stubbornly alive. Each street, each building, each passerby carried a story, a whisper of struggle, hope, or survival. Martha felt the connection between the crib and the town, the invisible pulse of life that linked the women above to the miners, the families, the wandering travelers below. She began to understand that survival was not only personal, it was woven into the quiet rhythm of the community around her. One afternoon, Suddy pulled Martha aside, her gaze steady, unflinching. "Watch closely," she whispered. "The world is always telling you what it is. Not in words, but in the way a man hesitates, in the subtle shift of a look, in the sound of footsteps on the stairs." She demonstrated how to read expressions, notice subtle cues, and anticipate danger without panic. It was a quiet education, taught in whispers and soft gestures, a language of caution and understanding that only those who survive truly spoke. Martha felt her senses sharpen, her awareness stretching like a thread through the room, the crib, the town, and the unknown dangers waiting outside. As the days lengthened into weeks, Martha felt the fragile bonds of the crib grow stronger. Charlotte shared a quiet smile over tea. Pearl handed her a small loaf of bread. Daisy offered a hand-stitched scarf to ward off the evening chill. Each gesture was tiny, yet powerful, a thread of care woven through exhaustion, fear, and uncertainty. The crib became a sanctuary, a place where women looked after each other quietly, protecting, teaching, and comforting without fanfare or declaration. Martha began to understand that these bonds were more than friendship. They were armor, a shield against a world that offered little mercy. The first night Martha spent entirely alone in the crib felt different. The saloon below had grown quiet. The piano no longer whispered its uneven notes. Shadows stretched long across the room, and the wind rattled faintly against the thin walls. She felt the weight of solitude, the sense that the world beyond the crib was unpredictable, yet she also felt a quiet, growing confidence. She remembered Suddy's words, the whispered lessons, the gestures, and slowly, carefully, she moved through the night with quiet patience, learning to trust herself and finding strength in the soft, steady rhythm of the crib around her. Martha began to notice patterns in the town below. Certain men arrived at specific times. The general store always opened at the same hour, and miners' conversations carried hints of plans, troubles, and quiet alliances. She realized that life was composed of these subtle patterns, and that understanding them could offer safety, insight, and opportunity. The crib, once a place of uncertainty and fear, now became a vantage point, a quiet observatory from which she could learn, not just to survive, but to navigate the fragile, complex world around her. One evening, Daisy and Pearl shared quiet stories of caution. Men to avoid, paths to steer clear of, foremen whose tempers were sharp. Each whispered warning was like a thread woven into Martha's understanding. Danger existed, yes, but knowledge, shared carefully, was a shield stronger than any weapon. Martha listened, memorizing every name, every subtle detail. The crib's wisdom, passed softly, became a quiet force in her mind, a map of safety, care, and survival in a world that offered little mercy. As the month passed, Martha began to feel the first glimmers of comfort. The crib's small, worn walls no longer felt oppressive, but protective. The soft breathing of women around her, the careful placement of objects, the gentle routines of daily life, all combined into a rhythm she could rely on. She felt, perhaps for the first time, that she belonged. Not fully, for the world outside was unpredictable, but enough to allow herself a moment of calm, and to drift into sleep without fear pressing at her chest. Martha lay in bed that night, listening to the slow, steady heartbeat of the crib. Small acts of care, whispered advice, and shared laughter formed invisible threads, binding her to the women around her. The world outside was rough, yes, and the town unpredictable. But within these thin walls, she found patience, understanding, and the fragile, enduring comfort of belonging. As her eyes closed, the crib's rhythm carried her gently into dreams, soft, slow, and comforting, the heartbeat of Silver Creek, of survival, care, and quiet sisterhood, lulling her into a deep, restorative sleep. Night fell again over Silver Creek. Below the crib, the saloon breathed its familiar music. Glasses clinking, boots scuffing the floor, a piano sighing half-forgotten tunes. Martha listened from above, the wooden floorboards vibrating faintly under her bed. She imagined the men's tired faces, the soft glow of lamplight, the smell of whiskey heavy in the air. From up here, the noise felt distant, softened, like the echo of a river heard from far away. It was not comfort exactly, but it was company, a reminder that even in the stillness of her room, life moved steadily below, carrying her with its rhythm. Suddy entered the hallway that night, her steps deliberate, her gaze steady. She paused outside each door, her voice quiet, but firm enough to travel through thin walls. Rest when you can. Keep your strength. Tomorrow will always come, and with it, another chance to endure. The words carried like a prayer, settling into the hearts of the women listening in silence. Martha lay still, her hands folded, and felt the calm weight of those words ease her chest. It was not just instruction. It was care disguised as discipline, a soft thread pulling them all toward safety. Later, Martha stood by the small window, watching the town fall into night. The dirt road shimmered under moonlight, lanterns flickered weakly on wooden posts, and shadows stretched long from half-built houses. A wagon creaked past, wheels groaning in the cool air. A stray dog padded silently across the street, its paws raising faint clouds of dust. Silver Creek was rough, unfinished, yet strangely peaceful. Even in its silence, the town seemed to breathe, as if it too was learning to rest after long, weary days. One evening, Suddy found Martha sitting with restless hands. The madam placed a calm palm on her shoulder, her eyes slowing Martha's racing breath. "Stillness," she said softly. "It is as powerful as movement. In stillness, you see clearer. In stillness, you survive longer." The words lingered in Martha's chest. She closed her eyes, let her body sink deeper into the chair, and felt the lesson settle like water into dry soil. Stillness was not weakness. It was patience, the quiet endurance that made survival possible. On nights when the saloon grew too loud, the women gathered in the crib's narrow hallway, sharing stories in soft voices. Pearl spoke of her children far away. Charlotte told tales of travelers she once met, and Daisy, with a faint smile, described a summer garden she once knew. The words floated gently in the dim light, like drifting lanterns on a slow-moving river. Martha listened, her own story tucked quietly inside her chest. She realized that survival was not only about coin and caution. It was about memory, about carrying the warmth of what once was into nights that often felt cold and endless. One night, the skies opened, and rain fell heavy on Silver Creek. The roof above the crib groaned softly under the weight, water tapping its rhythm across wooden beams. The women grew quiet, listening. For once, the saloon noise seemed muted, buried beneath the steady, cleansing song of the rain. Martha lay back, the sound wrapping around her like a blanket. Each drop, each gentle rhythm, seemed to wash the day away, leaving only calm, slow breathing, and the promise of rest. Through the thin curtain, Martha noticed Sheriff Parker one afternoon, walking with his steady gait, his hand resting lightly on his belt, his eyes scanning the street with calm awareness. He was not unkind, not indulgent, but practical, a man who understood the fragile balance of this town. His presence reassured the women quietly, for his inspections were steady, not cruel, and his watchful eyes kept certain dangers at bay. Martha observed, learning to see in him not just authority, but a quiet rhythm of order that kept Silver Creek from slipping into chaos. One evening, the saloon's lamps sputtered, and the crib was left dim, lit only by candles flickering in shallow dishes. The shadows danced across thin walls, stretching long, curling, softening. The women spoke less that night, their voices hushed as if not to disturb the flame's quiet work. Martha watched the light bend and shift, the wax pooling slowly, time measured not in hours, but in the steady softening of candle stubs. It was a night that felt suspended, gentle, timeless, a moment of fragile beauty carved from hardship. The rain that had soaked the town cleared by morning, leaving Silver Creek fresh. Its dirt roads pressed smooth and dark. The air smelled of wet earth, and the sun stretched slowly across rooftops, turning puddles into mirrors of light. Martha stood quietly at the window, breathing in the freshness, feeling for the first time in days, a deep stillness in her chest. It was as if the storm had washed not just the streets, but the weight from her shoulders, leaving her with a fleeting, precious calm. That night, Martha lay in bed, listening to the breaths of the women around her, the faint music below, and the soft hum of the town settling into silence. She realized that she was no longer only surviving. She was weaving herself into the crib, into the town, into a rhythm larger than her own. Each whisper, each shared gesture, was a thread of belonging, and as her eyes closed, she felt those threads hold her gently, carrying her into dreams, steady as the heartbeat of Silver Creek itself. The first rays of dawn crept through thin curtains, painting the walls with pale gold. Martha stirred awake to the soft chorus of breath around her. The crib, usually filled with voices and footsteps, was hushed in this hour, each woman caught between dream and waking. The boards beneath her felt warm from the night's bodies, the air tinged with faint traces of perfume and smoke. Morning in Silver Creek did not rush. It arrived gently, slipping into rooms, stretching shadows long and tender, reminding all who lived here that time was still moving forward, whether or not they were ready to follow. Suddy stood by the window, her arms folded, her eyes tracing the street below. The town was waking, men stepping out of boarding houses, horses snorting at the hitching posts, dust rising with each slow bootstep. Her face was calm, unreadable, but her silence spoke of duty. She carried the weight of many lives, women whose safety depended on her sharp eyes, and her unspoken rules. To Martha, watching from the corner, Suddy seemed like a lighthouse, silent, steady, a flame that guided without needing to shout. In the quiet of late morning, the women swept the floors, the soft rasp of broom bristles filling the hall. It was a simple rhythm, dust shifting, boards creaking, footsteps moving slowly back and forth. For Martha, the sound became soothing, like a song of order, each stroke of the broom clearing not just the floor, but the heaviness of yesterday. She found herself humming softly, a tune with no words, a melody stitched from dust and sunlight. By midday, the saloon lay quiet, chairs pushed against walls, the piano closed, tables still carrying the scent of spilled drink. Martha crept down once, peering at the empty room. It looked different in daylight, less like a den of noise, more like a resting animal, its muscles loose, its breath slow. Even silence had a sound here, the hum of flies, the groan of timber shifting in the sun, the faint memory of music still lingering in the air. One afternoon, Charlotte received a letter. The handwriting was uneven, the ink smudged, but her eyes lit as she unfolded it. She read quietly to herself, a smile breaking slowly across her tired face. It spoke of a brother far away, of fields green with spring, of a home still waiting. The women listened as she shared a few lines, the words carrying them briefly out of Silver Creek, into landscapes of memory, where the air was softer, and life did not weigh so heavy on their shoulders. Even Martha, who had no letter waiting, felt warmed by the sound, as if hope could be borrowed, shared like bread among friends. That evening, Sheriff Parker stepped inside. His boots tapped slow across the boards, his eyes calm but searching, the women stilled, watching from doorways, waiting to see if his presence carried trouble. But his voice was even, his questions simple. No arrests, no threats, just a reminder of rules, a quiet insistence on order. Then, as suddenly as he arrived, he tipped his hat and left, leaving behind not fear, but a strange reassurance, like the steady weight of a fence post, keeping the wild at bay. Suddy sat Martha down at the desk one night, placing the heavy ledger before her. "Count every coin," she said. "Numbers tell their own story. Learn them, and you will see the truth." The book smelled of ink and old wood, its pages thick with entries. Martha traced the lines carefully, reading the patterns of spending, the steady trickle of survival. It was not just arithmetic. It was the heartbeat of the crib, written in ink, teaching her that even in a place built on fragility, there was a rhythm to trust. One night, the lanterns burned low, casting warm halos on the hallway walls. The air was thick with smoke and faint perfume. Yet in that golden light, the women seemed softer, their faces glowing as if touched by candle flame. Martha sat cross-legged on the floor, watching the shadows sway and bend. Each flicker felt like a promise, that even in darkness, light could find a way to dance. Pearl returned from the kitchen one evening, with a loaf of bread still warm from the oven. She tore it gently, passing pieces into waiting hands. The crust crackled softly, the steam rose fragrant in the dim room. They ate slowly, carefully, as though the bread were treasure. For Martha, each bite was more than food. It was kindness baked into form, a reminder that sharing was a kind of wealth, greater than coin. As the town settled, and the saloon below softened into silence, Daisy began to hum a lullaby. Her voice was low, almost broken, but it carried like a thread through the room. One by one, the women joined, a harmony fragile yet whole, rising like smoke toward the rafters. Martha closed her eyes, the music wrapping around her chest, steady, tender, the sound made not for survival, but for comfort. And in that moment, she realized that even here, in the crib above Silver Creek, songs could still build a home. The morning air carried the smell of earth and grain. Martha stepped outside for the first time in many days, her feet slow against the wooden planks of Market Street. Stalls lined the narrow road, sacks of flowers stacked high, apples laid in neat rows, bright cloth fluttering gently in the breeze. Voices rose and fell like waves, merchants calling, buyers answering, coins clinking into rough palms. For Martha, it felt almost like another world, a place where life moved with simple rhythm, where hunger could be softened with bread, and strangers brushed past one another. Without judgment, without question, she let the air fill her lungs, the murmur of the market wrapping around her ears, a sound like a lullaby built of ordinary days. Back in the crib, the afternoon sun pressed hot against the windows. Charlotte sat by the edge of her bed, her hands busy with a scrap of cloth, sewing careful, steady stitches. Martha asked quietly about her letter, and Charlotte's eyes softened. She spoke of a small farm far away, rows of corn bending in the wind, a mother's hand stirring soup in an iron pot, a brother laughing in the field with shoes too big for his feet. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried the weight of longing. As Martha listened, she realized that the crib did not erase the past. Every woman here carried a piece of somewhere else, a home that lingered in memory, shaping them silently, guiding them like stars hidden behind clouds. One evening, dark clouds gathered heavy over Silver Creek. The air shifted, cool and damp, and soon the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping against the roof like soft fingertips. The women gathered by the window, watching the street blur into rippling puddles. Horses stamping nervously, men rushing for cover. The sound of rain filled the room, steady, soothing, thus. For Martha, it felt like a blessing. The dust of weeks washed away, the smell of earth rising fresh and new. She closed her eyes and let the rhythm sink into her bones, each drop a quiet prayer, each rivulet a reminder that even the hardest soil could soften under rain. As the storm deepened, lanterns were lit along the saloon's porch, their glow swaying in the wind. Inside, the crib felt safe, walls creaking gently but holding firm. The women sat close together, telling small stories to pass the hours. Tales of distant rivers, of mothers' lullabies, of dresses once worn in brighter rooms. The lantern light flickered across their faces, softening the lines of fatigue, making them seem, if only for a moment, like sisters gathered around a hearth. Martha leaned against the wall, her eyelids heavy, the storm song outside mixing with the warmth within. And she thought, perhaps safety was not in silence, but in togetherness. The next morning, the rain had passed. The air smelled clean, the boards of the porch still wet beneath boot heels. A rider delivered a letter, this time for Pearl. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal, eyes darting across the page. No one asked what it said, but when she folded it carefully, placing it inside her dress, her smile was small yet certain. The others did not need to know. The letter itself was enough, a thread tying her to something beyond these walls, a reminder that the world was still vast, still holding pieces of hope, waiting patiently for its daughters to return. The evening sun bled red across the rooftops of Silver Creek. Shadows lengthened, stretching thin fingers along the dusty street. A rider came slow, his horse weary, its mane damp with sweat, its hooves striking tired rhythms against the boards. The women watched from the window, their laughter quieting to silence. The man's coat was long, his hat pulled low, his presence carrying an air of weight, not of violence, but of stories unspoken, wounds carried in silence. He dismounted, pausing to tie the reins loosely by the saloon's post. Before stepping inside, his boots heavy against the floorboards. No words yet, only the presence of a stranger, bringing with him the restless hush of the frontier. Inside, the lamplight painted the saloon in amber hues. Men played cards, coins clicking, voices rising and falling. But the stranger walked past them all, his gaze steady, until it rested on Suddy at the bar. Their eyes met, hers sharp with knowing, his calm yet cautious. A few words were exchanged, too soft for Martha to catch, yet filled with unspoken gravity. Suddy's lips pressed into a thin line, her hand tapping twice on the counter. The signal was clear. Something had shifted, something that would ripple through their quiet lives. Later that night, in the stillness of the crib, Martha could not sleep. The stranger's presence lingered in her mind. The way he moved, the quiet weight of his silence, the way Suddy's eyes had darkened like storm clouds. She lay awake, listening to the sound of boots on the porch, the creak of wood under shifting weight, the faint laughter drifting up from the saloon below. Her thoughts turned restless. The crib had once felt like a cage, then like a shelter, but now it felt fragile, as though the thin walls could splinter at the first hard knock. And so she closed her eyes tighter, breathing slow, willing herself into the arms of sleep, as if dreams might shield her from the stranger's shadow. In the gray light before dawn, Pearl knelt by the window, hands folded quietly, her lips moving in a prayer only she could hear. The room was hushed, the town still wrapped in sleep. Even the saloon below lay silent, its doors closed, its lamps dark. Martha watched her, not speaking, but sensing the depth of the moment. Pearl's eyes were closed tight, her whispers carried like threads of smoke, fragile, fading, yet full of faith. Perhaps it was for her children, perhaps for all of them. The words did not matter. The act itself was enough. A candle flickered faintly beside her, its flame small but unwavering, a light for the living, a light for the lost. By evening, the stranger had not gone. His boots echoed once more against the wooden floor, the sound distinct, measured, like a drumbeat announcing change. The women glanced at one another, their laughter faltering, their movements quieter. Suddy stood by the doorway, her arms crossed, her presence calm yet braced. The stranger tipped his hat, his eyes scanning the room with quiet intent. Not a threat, not a comfort, something in between. The sound of his boots filled the silence, marking the space between what had been and what was about to come. Martha felt her breath catch, her heart steady but alert, as though even in this place of routine, the world was about to shift. The sun had barely lifted above the ridges when the stranger spoke his first words. He gave his name slowly, as though he were unused to sharing it. Jonas Reed. The syllables carried a weight, like stone rolling down a hill, not fast but inevitable. Suddy repeated it under her breath, her eyes narrowing in thought. Jonas Reed. A name not unfamiliar, but not yet explained. The women exchanged glances, and though none of them knew why, they felt the room had tilted, as though Silver Creek itself had shifted a fraction, waiting for what would follow. By afternoon, whispers spread. The men at the saloon spoke in hushed tones, leaning close across the table. Jonas Reed had once been tied to the railroad, they said. Not as a worker, but as an enforcer. A man who settled disputes with steady hands and harder eyes. Others claimed he had left the job suddenly, his conscience cracked open by something unseen. No one knew the truth, but all knew this. Wherever Jonas Reed set his boots, change was never far behind. Martha heard the rumors with a chill. Her life had become carefully balanced, each day predictable, each night survivable, and yet this man carried with him the tremor of disruption. That night, the crib was too small for restless thoughts. Martha stepped out, the air cool against her cheeks, the sound of insects humming low. Downstairs, Jonas sat by the saloon fire. Not gambling, not drinking, just sitting, his hands folded, his eyes watching the flames sway and bend. For a moment, she saw something human in him. Not the shadow of rumor, not the weight of threat, but a man alone, holding silence like a fragile stone. She turned before he noticed her, slipping back upstairs, her heart heavy with questions. She dared not ask aloud. The next morning, Daisy spoke in hurried whispers. Her brother, working on the edge of the railroad line, had once mentioned Jonas Reed. A fight, a death, a story unfinished. Her voice trembled, her hands clutching Martha's wrist as though for anchor. Men like him, she said, they don't come to towns like ours unless they're sent. The words clung to Martha's skin, an unease that seeped deep, like cold water beneath a door. She reassured Daisy gently, but in her own chest. Her heartbeat quickened, matching the rhythm of distant train wheels. She could almost hear in the silence. Days passed, and still Jonas Reed lingered. He did not drink to excess, nor cause fights, nor take comfort in the crib. He simply stayed, watching, waiting. The town began to adjust around him, as though he were a new piece of furniture, set heavy in the corner of a familiar room. Yet Martha felt the weight of him everywhere. Each creak of the floorboards, each echo of boots on the street, reminded her of the balance between safety and upheaval. And so, each night, she lay awake longer, eyes tracing the lines of the ceiling, breathing slow, as though bracing herself for the knock that might one day come. The saloon's upstairs office smelled faintly of ink and old tobacco. Suddy sat behind her desk, papers stacked neatly before her, lamp casting a circle of pale gold across the wood. Jonas Reed entered quietly, closing the door with the careful weight of a man who measured every sound. Martha, passing by the hallway, caught the hush of voices, Suddy's sharp, measured tone, Jonas's low and steady reply. She could not hear the words, but she felt their edges. Something about land, something about Holcomb, something about the railroad's reach into the heart of Silver Creek. The door shut tight, the voices fading into secrecy, and Martha, lingering by the wall, understood that whatever bargain was struck in that room would ripple through every corner of their fragile world. The next morning, Sheriff Parker rode slow through town, his horse kicking up little clouds of dust. He reined in by the saloon, leaning down from the saddle to speak with Suddy. His voice carried just enough to reach Martha, who stood by the doorway sweeping the porch. Men like Reed, the sheriff said, they don't settle unless they're chasing something, or someone. Suddy nodded, her expression unreadable. The sheriff tipped his hat and rode on, but the words clung heavy in the air, like storm clouds refusing to break. Martha's hand tightened around the broom handle. The sheriff's warning was not for Suddy alone. It was for all of them, a reminder that Silver Creek was never as quiet as it seemed. By evening, the town shifted uneasily. Rumors spread like dry grass catching sparks. Men in the general store spoke of new maps, new claims marked along the creek bed. The women overheard whispers of Holcomb buying more land. His eyes set on clearing the brothel out for the railroad's path. The crib filled with nervous voices. Daisy wrung her hands. Pearl kept her prayers longer at night. Charlotte laughed louder than usual, her cheer forced but steady, like a lantern held high against encroaching dark. And Martha, she felt the tension settle into her bones, an invisible weight pressing against her shoulders, reminding her of Boston, of broken promises, of the way men's decisions had always written the lives of women, without ever asking their names. In the quiet hours after midnight, Martha descended the stairs for a glass of water. The saloon below was nearly dark, lamps dimmed, the fire a bed of glowing embers. There, in the half-light, she saw Jonas and Edward Hayes, the bookshop owner, sitting at opposite ends of a table. Neither man spoke. Their eyes met across the silence, and something unspoken passed between them. Acknowledgement, challenge, a thread of history Martha could not yet grasp. She froze on the stair, listening, waiting, but no words came, only silence. And then Jonas rose, tipping his hat faintly, before stepping into the shadows outside. Edward sat alone, his hand tightening around his glass, as though holding on to more than just the weight of the drink. Martha returned to her bed, but sleep did not come easily. Her mind replayed the pieces, the whispers of Holcomb's plans, the sheriff's warning, Suddy's closed-door meeting, the silent exchange between Jonas and Edward. The crib walls, once merely thin, now felt transparent, as though every secret, every danger, were pressing right through them. She closed her eyes, forcing her breath into rhythm, matching the slow tick of the clock on the wall. And in that fragile stillness, she told herself what she always told herself, that dawn would come, and with it, a chance to hold the pieces together. For one more day. The moon hung low over Silver Creek, its pale glow spilling across the rooftops, and stretching shadows long over the dirt road. Martha stood at her window, the glass cool beneath her fingertips, and she looked out upon a street that seemed emptier than it had ever been. No laughter drifted from the saloon porch. No horses stirred at the hitching posts. The town lay in a hush that was less like rest and more like anticipation. She thought of Boston nights, how the lamps in the city flickered even past midnight, how wheels clattered across cobblestone, and how she had once believed that a place could never truly sleep. But Silver Creek slept differently. Here, the silence did not soothe. It waited. It held its breath. It reminded her that something unseen was moving closer with every passing hour. Down by the river, Jonas Reed sat on a stone, his hat pushed back, watching the black water flow beneath the stars. The current whispered against the rocks. It sounds steady and endless, as though it carried the memory of every secret this land had ever buried. He lit a match, cupping the flame in his calloused hands, and brought it to a cigarette. The smoke curled into the cool night, and he narrowed his eyes, as though reading shapes within it. Behind him, the cottonwoods rustled. Some would have thought it was only wind, but Jonas turned, slow and deliberate, his hand brushing the revolver at his hip. Nothing emerged. Not yet. And so he sat again, alone with the water, alone with the smoke, alone with a past that had followed him farther than any map could mark. Inside the crib, the women could not sleep. Pearl sat cross-legged upon her bed, rosary beads slipping between her fingers, prayers tumbling softly into the air like scattered petals. Charlotte leaned by the window, her laughter gone now, her face pale and serious, as she whispered of overheard talk in the saloon. Talk of Reed's connections, talk of Holcomb's offers, talk of money enough to buy men's silence, and women's futures alike. Daisy, restless, kept pacing the floorboards, her hands worrying the hem of her nightdress. She asked questions no one wished to answer. What would happen if Holcomb won? What would happen if Reed stayed? What would happen to them when the crib was no longer theirs to keep? Martha listened, but she did not join in. She kept her silence, because she knew that fear, when spoken aloud, could spread faster than fire. Sheriff Parker rode the outskirts that night, his lantern swinging at his side, casting moving shapes along the scrub and brush. He had the look of a man who had walked this same path 100 times before, and yet never trusted what waited beyond the bend. The stars overhead were sharp and endless. The air was cool, but sweat lingered at the back of his neck. He thought of Silver Creek as a house built on shifting sand, the people inside trying to live quiet lives, while beneath the surface, the ground threatened to swallow them whole. When he reined in his horse, to listen to the silence, he thought he heard footsteps where there should be none. But when the lantern beam swung wide, nothing moved but grass. And yet, in the hollows of his chest, he carried a certainty that something was already inside the town, waiting, just beyond the reach of his light. That night, sleep finally came for Martha, but it came as a heavy, twisted thing. She dreamed she walked along the Silver Creek, her shoes sinking into mud. As the water rose higher and higher around her ankles, she saw the crib, its wooden frame half submerged, the women calling her name from the windows, their faces blurred, their hands reaching. She tried to run, But the water pulled, cold and unrelenting. And then Jonas stood on the opposite bank, his silhouette dark against the horizon. He lifted a lantern, but the light did not cross the river. It stayed with him, leaving her in shadow. When she woke, her sheets were damp with sweat, her breath ragged, and the sound of water still rushing in her ears. The dream left her shaken, for it felt less like imagination, and more like prophecy whispered by the land itself. The hour was late, and the town should have been sleeping. Yet Martha stirred awake at a sound, the dull rhythm of hooves upon hard ground. Slow, steady, deliberate. She rose from her bed, wrapped her shawl about her shoulders, and pressed her ear to the thin wall. The sound did not rush past like a rider in haste. It circled, it lingered, as if someone were measuring the street, studying its silence, counting its shadows. Through the crack of her curtain, she caught the faintest outline, the horse. A rider cloaked, pausing at the saloon, turning slowly as if listening for breath behind every shuttered window. The hooves faded only when dawn began to touch the sky. And yet the echo of that sound would not leave her chest for hours. Inside the saloon, long after midnight, a few men still sat hunched around the poker table. Whiskey lamps flickered low, casting heavy shadows across unshaven faces, and cards bent with sweat. Reed was there, silent as always, his gaze on the table but his thoughts elsewhere. Across from him, a man spoke too much, his words slurred, his laughter brittle. Every hand dealt seemed to weigh the room down further. It was not a game now, but a measure of patience. Who would speak first? Who would flinch? Who would reveal what they carried inside? Reed placed a card down with quiet precision, and in that single motion, it was as if the table itself exhaled. A deal had been made, though no one would say it aloud. Not yet. Upstairs in the crib, Pearl kept a candle burning at her bedside. She said it was for prayer, but the truth was she feared the dark. In darkness she heard voices, not the voices of the living, but those of the women who had come before. She would whisper their names sometimes, names no one else remembered, names carved faintly into the underside of her bed, where she traced them with her fingertips. The candle's flame swayed with every breath of air, and she believed that in its glow, the shadows bent into shapes she almost recognized. She prayed not for herself, but for Martha, for Charlotte, for Daisy, for all of them, as if her small flame could shield them from the weight of what was coming. Jonas sat alone in his rented room, his chair tilted back against the wall, a broken pocket watch resting in his hand. It no longer ticked. The hands were frozen at a moment years gone by. He would wind it sometimes anyway, listening to the silence where sound should be. To him, it was not a reminder of time lost, but of the fact that time itself could be broken, shattered in an instant, leaving a man to walk forward carrying hours that no longer belonged to the world. He turned the watch over and over, his thumb brushing the dent along its edge, a scar much like his own. And though his eyes were fixed on the brass, his ears never left the window, listening. Always listening. When dawn came, it did not arrive with birdsong or cheer. It crept like a pale stranger through the streets of Silver Creek. Martha stepped outside, her shawl wrapped tight, her breath rising in faint clouds. The street lay hushed. The dust carried no fresh tracks, and yet she could feel the weight of unseen footsteps, still lingering in the earth beneath her boots. She walked slowly, as though each plank of the boardwalk might give way to secrets buried beneath. The saloon door creaked open. Reed stood there, tired, watchful, a shadow in the doorway. Their eyes met, and though no words were spoken, an understanding passed between them that the town was holding its breath, that the hours ahead would shape what remained of them all. Martha lowered her gaze, turned, and stepped back into the crib, the dawn behind her as heavy as night itself. The saloon had long fallen silent, yet from the narrow window above, a sound drifted into the morning air. Charlotte sat at the edge of her bed, her hair loose over her shoulders, her voice soft as she sang a tune. no one in Silver Creek would recognize. It was a lullaby her mother had once hummed. Back in the rolling fields of Kentucky, a song of rivers that never dried, and of children who never knew hunger. Her voice trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of memory, pressing against her ribs. Down in the street, a ranch hand passing by paused to listen. He could not hear the words, but the melody lingered in him, as if it carried some truth the town itself had forgotten. Charlotte closed her eyes, and for a moment, Silver Creek faded, replaced by fields of green, and a sky wide enough to hold her dreams. When the last note fell away, she whispered to herself, one day I'll leave this place." Daisy stood before the cracked mirror that hung on the crib's wall. The glass had been broken years before, but no one ever replaced it. Instead, the women learned to see themselves in scattered fragments. She tilted her face this way and that, touching the line of her cheek, the corner of her lips. Sometimes she hardly recognized the reflection. Was she the same girl who once danced barefoot in her father's wheat fields? Or was she only this, a collection of pieces, struggling to appear whole? Her fingers brushed the silvered cracks, and she whispered, "I am still me. I am still here." But even as she said it, she felt the truth tug against her chest, that the girl she had been was slipping further away with every passing season. In his office, Sheriff Parker opened the small leather notebook he kept hidden in his desk drawer. Inside were not laws, nor names of wanted men, but thoughts, scraps of memory, questions he dared not speak aloud. He had written of Reed, trust uncertain, history unclear. He had written of Holcomb, power too easy, influence too wide. And he had written of the women of the crib, more honest than most, deserve better. He tapped his pencil against the page, listening to the groan of the town waking outside. He knew Silver Creek was not strong enough to survive another storm of greed and violence. And yet he also knew that storms did not wait for permission to arrive. He closed the notebook, slid it back into the drawer, and told himself he would face whatever came with the rising sun. But in truth, the notebook felt heavier every time he touched it, as though the words themselves were becoming a burden he could not put down. Jonas Reed sat by the window of his room, the lamplight casting his features into hard lines. Before him lay a map of the territory, edges frayed, ink fading with years of use. His finger traced the rivers, the trails, the forgotten paths that stretched beyond the mountains. Places he had walked, places he had run from, places he had buried pieces of himself. The lamp sputtered, and for a moment, his shadow stretched long against the wall, a figure that seemed taller, broader, as if reminding him that a man could never escape the size of his own past. He closed his eyes, and the sound of water returned to him, the same river where he once left everything behind. Its current had not stopped flowing. Neither had his guilt. The lamplight steadied again, but Jonas did not notice. He was already lost, in the places no map could ever mark. Martha stood at the crib's doorway, her hand resting on the frame, her breath catching in the early light. She watched as townsfolk moved quietly along the street, men tipping hats, women carrying baskets, children tugging at skirts. Ordinary lives, woven together by chores and small talk. And she, standing apart, felt the weight of that invisible line, the one that kept her always just outside, the circle of belonging. Yet she did not envy them. Not today. She had seen too much of the world's cruelty to believe in simple lives. Instead, she held to something else, a quiet defiance, a vow that whatever storm Silver Creek faced, she would not bow to it. Her hand pressed harder against the doorway, as if drawing strength from the wood itself. She whispered, "This is my place. For now, this is my place." And with that, she stepped back inside, carrying with her a resolve that even the shadows of the town could not erase. Dawn spilled softly over Silver Creek, light brushing the rooftops in gentle strokes of gold. Martha rose first, her body stiff from the restless sleep of the night before. She moved quietly through the crib, checking each door, straightening blankets, and ensuring the small chores were done before the day truly began. Pearl stirred beside her, grumbling softly, but obeying the rhythm of Martha's steps. The world outside moved slowly, the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the faint bark of a dog chasing an unseen intruder, the soft hum of wind across the hills. Martha paused at the window, breathing in the cool air, and thought about the day ahead. Holcomb's plans were looming, but today, they would face it together, the women of the crib, each small act of preparation a shield against the unknown. Suddy gathered the women in the back room, papers spread across the table like a river of ink. Her voice was calm, measured, but carried the weight of authority that had been forged in years of necessity. "Holcomb thinks he can scare us," she said, and the women listened, silent, hearts beating quietly against the floorboards. She outlined their plan: alliances with miners' families, support from Edward Hayes, letters drafted to town officials, small but crucial steps to ensure the crib's survival. Each word was a stitch in the fabric of hope, each pause a moment to let courage settle into their bones. Martha felt her own pulse steady, her mind calculating, noting every detail. She realized that leadership was not about loud voices, but about knowing when to act, when to wait, and how to turn fear into strength. The bell above the bookshop door tinkled softly, and Edward Hayes stepped inside, his expression calm but purposeful. He greeted Martha with a nod, and together they moved to a corner table, away from prying eyes. Edward spoke quietly, sharing news of Holcomb's land acquisitions, of the subtle changes in town regulations, of whispers that would otherwise reach the crib too late. Martha listened, scribbling notes in the margins of a small notebook. Her pen moved like a river, capturing every word, turning information into strategy. When Edward left, she remained by the window, watching his figure fade down the street, and felt a quiet resolve solidify in her chest. They would face Holcomb's plans together, and they would endure. Outside, the town seemed calm, but Martha knew better. Shadows shifted along the edges of buildings, and men who smiled by day carried knives in the night. A letter slipped under the door of the crib, its words sharp enough to draw blood. "Leave before it is too late." The women gathered, eyes wide, but voices low. Suddy held the note in her hands, reading it twice before letting it rest on the table. Her face remained unreadable, but the women knew she felt it, the weight of danger, the invisible pressure that sought to bend them, to make them vanish quietly into the dust of the street. Martha's hand rested atop Suddy's, a silent gesture of solidarity. No fear spoken, but all understood the message. The fight was coming closer. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, Silver Creek bathed in hues of amber and violet. The town exhaled, settling into its evening rhythm. Martha walked along the porch of the crib, listening to the quiet murmur of the saloon below, the soft laughter of a miner's child playing with a stray dog, the distant rumble of wagons returning from the hills. She paused, taking in the stillness, feeling the hum of life beneath the tension, and understood something vital. Silver Creek was fragile, but it was alive. And as night deepened, she returned inside, laying down in her small bed, closing her eyes to the rhythm of the town, letting the quiet pulse of its streets lull her into the long, deep sleep she so desperately needed to face the days to come. The first light of dawn seeped through the thin curtains, painting the room in soft shades of apricot and gray. Martha stretched, feeling the weight of the night linger in her shoulders. She moved quietly, careful not to wake the others, for even the smallest creak could shatter the fragile calm of early morning. Outside, the town was stirring. A blacksmith's hammer struck metal, the clip-clop of horse hooves echoed against the boardwalk, and somewhere, a child's laughter carried over the wind. Martha watched it all from her window, thinking about the crib, about Suddy, about the plan that would shape their days. The sun rose slowly, and with each passing ray, She felt the quiet determination solidify in her chest. This was not merely survival. It was endurance, it was preparation, and it was hope. Suddy poured herself a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the tiny kitchen of the crib. She moved with purpose, checking the ledgers, recounting the coins, and reviewing the notes on town ordinances she had collected. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, traced each word with patience. Every figure mattered, every name mattered, and every small misstep could cost them the crib, the women, their very place in Silver Creek. Pearl brought in the morning bread, and Suddy nodded, offering a rare smile. "Together," she said softly, "we are stronger than they think." Martha listened from the corner, absorbing every syllable, every pause, understanding that leadership was not just command, it was presence, it was steady attention in the smallest moments. A soft knock at the door interrupted the morning calm. Daisy opened it to find a small envelope lying on the porch. No markings, no signature, only the whisper of danger pressed into the paper. Inside, in neat handwriting, was a warning. "Do not interfere with Mr. Holcomb's plans. He is watching." The women gathered around, holding their breath as Suddy read aloud. Her voice was calm, but the tremor in her hand betrayed the seriousness of the message. Martha's mind raced, turning every word over as though it were a puzzle. This was not the first warning, and it would not be the last. Yet within the threat, she found resolve. "We will not be intimidated," she said softly, and in that moment, the room seemed to breathe with her determination, the weight of fear giving way to the steady pulse of courage. Edward Hayes walked carefully down the dusty street, his boots kicking up tiny clouds of earth. He had information to deliver, but also needed to observe without drawing attention. Silver Creek was alive with quiet eyes, neighbors watching neighbors, curious glances measuring intentions, and rumors that traveled faster than horses. He paused at the saloon, noting the light in the windows, the movement inside, and the presence of men who looked more dangerous in the calm of daylight than they ever did at night. Finally, he made his way to the crib, knocking softly. Martha opened the door, her eyes already expecting him, and together they stepped into the room, the morning light framing their quiet determination to safeguard the women and their place in the town. The women sat around the table, the letters, ledgers, and notes spread before them. No one spoke at first. The weight of thought was enough, each mind turning, each heart calculating, as if the very act of sitting together created a protective shield against the outside world. Martha traced the lines of a plan, her pen moving slowly, deliberately, the rhythm of her hands steadying the room. Suddy watched silently, knowing that the next hours would decide more than just their safety, they would decide their place in Silver Creek. And in that quiet, as the town continued to stir outside, a sense of calm focus filled the crib. It was a calm born of necessity, of intelligence, and of an unspoken promise. Together, they would endure. Together, they would survive. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, Silver Creek streets softened into long, quiet shadows. Martha lingered on the porch of the crib, watching the colors shift from gold to deep amber. Each shadow seemed to carry a whisper of the past, a hint of the stories buried beneath the dust of the town. Down the street, a wagon creaked slowly past, the driver humming a tune no one remembered. The women inside the crib felt the weight of anticipation, knowing that danger and opportunity often arrive together in the fading light. Martha drew in a slow breath, letting the calm of evening settle into her chest, and allowed herself to simply feel the rhythm of the town, its quiet pulse marking the hours, before the night's unknown events would unfold. Jonas Reed remained at the edge of the town, leaning against the rough timber of the saloon's back wall. His eyes swept the streets, watching the movements of townsfolk, counting shadows, noting the rhythm of daily life. He carried no weapon, but his presence alone was a sentinel's mark. Every passerby seemed lighter, smaller, as though aware of the quiet vigilance that cloaked the night. In the distance, a lantern flickered, and Reed's gaze followed it carefully, reading intentions from the way the flames swayed. He breathed slowly, drawing in the scent of dry earth and fading sunlight, and reminded himself that sometimes the most dangerous battles were fought in silence, in observation, and in the quiet timing of a single, deliberate act. Inside the crib, the women lit small candles, their soft glow reflecting off cracked mirrors and worn furniture. Martha moved from one candle to another, checking their flames, listening to the subtle creaks of the building settling. Each flicker of light seemed to carry memory, a memory of laughter, of pain, of plans whispered late at night. Pearl hummed softly as she worked, Charlotte folded linens, and Daisy traced the edges of a map. All the while the room held a calm reverence, a quiet ceremony for the day that had passed, and for the unknown that lay ahead. Martha closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the warmth of the candlelight seep into her thoughts, and she felt, for the first time in hours, that even in the presence of threat, they were not powerless. They were the heartbeat of their own story. The town settled fully into night, and the stars began to pierce the dark velvet sky. Martha stood at the window, watching Silver Creek breathe beneath the quiet night. The events of the day, the letters, the planning, the anticipation, all wove together into a tapestry of understanding. She felt a deep, steady resolve fill her chest, a certainty that despite Holcomb's threats, despite the fragile social balance of the town, they would endure. Suddy appeared behind her, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. No words were exchanged. It was not necessary. Together, they watched the town sleep, knowing that tomorrow would demand courage, and that their strength lay not only in action, but in the quiet patience that comes before the storm. Martha turned from the window, ready to rest, to dream, and to gather the strength, to face whatever the new day would bring. Dawn arrived slowly over Silver Creek, casting soft light over the wooden rooftops and dusty streets. Martha rose before the others, her body moving with the practiced grace of habit and necessity. She paused at the window of the crib, watching the town stretch and yawn in the gentle morning. The street below was quiet, save for the soft clatter of a cart and the distant crow of a rooster. She took a deep breath, feeling the crisp mountain air fill her lungs, and thought about the letters, the plans, the subtle threats that had arrived over the past days. Yet even amidst uncertainty, a sense of calm determination settled into her chest. The day ahead was theirs to face, and she would meet it with clarity, patience, and unwavering resolve. Suddy gathered the women in the back room, papers and ledgers spread across the worn table. Her voice was gentle yet commanding, each word carrying weight and intention. "Remember," she said, "we are not merely surviving. We are planning. We are building the crib into something stronger, a presence the town cannot ignore, even if they try." Martha watched, absorbing each instruction, noticing the meticulous care Suddy took in ensuring every step was calculated. Alliances with miners' families, letters to officials, community projects, everything is a stitch in the fabric of our survival. Suddy continued. The women nodded quietly, each heart beating with a shared sense of purpose, each mind turning, calculating, and preparing for the challenges that lay ahead. In the corner, Martha and Edward Hayes leaned close, their conversation hushed, carried out in whispers that barely disturbed the air. Edward shared the latest news of Holcomb's maneuvers, the subtle changes in zoning, the town council's shifting loyalties, and the quiet eyes watching their every step. Martha's hand moved across her notebook, capturing every word, turning them into strategies, into something tangible. The room around them hummed with quiet anticipation, as though the walls themselves were aware that decisions made in silence would shape the destiny of the crib and the women within it. When Edward left, Martha lingered for a moment at the window, watching him disappear down the street, and felt the steady pulse of determination solidify in her chest. The afternoon arrived, soft and unhurried, the sunlight warm but not harsh against the town's wooden planks. Inside the crib, the women moved with quiet purpose. Pearl tended to the small garden boxes outside, while Charlotte repaired worn garments, and Daisy organized the ledgers and receipts. Martha wandered between them, checking each task, offering gentle guidance, yet allowing the women space to act with autonomy. The rhythm of the afternoon was a lullaby in itself. The soft rustle of paper, the hum of conversation, the faint laughter of someone recalling a small, joyful memory. Even amidst the looming threats, the crib felt like a sanctuary, a place where life continued, deliberate, steady, and unbroken. As evening descended, Martha returned to her room, the light fading into soft amber and violet hues. She sat by the window, watching Silver Creek settle into quiet repose, its streets slowly emptying, the distant murmur of the saloon fading into calm. Her thoughts drifted across the events of the past days, the letters, the plans, the silent threats, and the quiet victories of small, deliberate action. A sense of peace settled over her chest, not because the danger had vanished, but because she understood that calm focus, patience, and strategy were as powerful as any weapon. She closed her eyes, letting the fading light and the quiet rhythm of the town carry her towards sleep, knowing that tomorrow they would continue to build, to endure, and to claim their place in the world they had chosen. Light spilled gently across the rooftops of Silver Creek, casting long, tender shadows that danced across dusty streets. Martha rose before the others, her movements quiet and deliberate, each step measured to honor the rhythm of the town. She paused at the window, breathing in the crisp morning air, and let her thoughts wander across the events to come. Plans laid in the shadows of the crib were waiting to be set in motion. Holcomb's threats lingered, but Martha felt a growing certainty in her chest. They would not be moved, they would not be silenced, and each small choice they made was a step toward endurance, toward quiet victory. In the back room of the crib, Suddy called the women together, her voice gentle, measured, like sunlight filtering through thin curtains. "Every move we make," she said, "must be deliberate, precise, and calm. The town is a chessboard, and we are learning the rhythm of its pieces." Martha listened carefully, absorbing each word like a seed planted in fertile soil. The women nodded, silent, their resolve slowly crystallizing into quiet strength. Every instruction, every suggestion, was not just survival, it was preparation, a way to claim power without raising a hand, to build a presence that could not be ignored, even by those who sought to erase them from the town's story. As the sun leaned low in the sky, Edward Hayes arrived at the crib, his footsteps soft against the wooden planks. He carried news of town council maneuvers, subtle shifts in loyalties, and quiet rumors that traveled faster than the wind. Martha welcomed him with a calm nod, inviting him to the corner of the room where papers and ledgers awaited. Together they whispered, their conversation a river of strategy and insight, each note a lifeline, each pause a breath of careful calculation. When Edward left, Martha remained at the window, watching the fading light, feeling the quiet pulse of purpose steady within her. The evening settled over Silver Creek with gentle patience, softly painting rooftops and streets in amber and deep violet. Inside the crib, the women moved with care and grace, folding linens, tending small fires, and sharing moments of quiet laughter that drifted through the room like delicate notes of a lullaby. Martha walked among them, offering guidance where needed, but allowing space for autonomy and quiet strength. The rhythm of chores, of small acts of care and order, created a sanctuary of calm, a haven against the distant, unspoken threats of the town. Even as shadows grew longer, the women felt the comforting hum of solidarity, their hearts beating together in the quiet certainty of shared purpose. As night deepened, Silver Creek exhaled, the streets emptied, and the stars emerged, fragile and luminous against the dark sky. Martha returned to her room, the soft glow of candlelight illuminating worn wooden floors. She sat by the window, watching the stillness, listening to the distant hum of life in the sleeping town. Her thoughts drifted across the events of the past days. Letters, whispered strategies, quiet threats, and small victories. A gentle calm settled over her chest, not born of ignorance of danger, but from understanding, focus, and preparation. She closed her eyes, feeling the rhythm of the town lull her toward rest, knowing that tomorrow they would continue to endure and to quietly carve their place in Silver Creek. The morning light crept softly over Silver Creek, slipping between the buildings like gentle fingers brushing a canvas. Martha rose slowly, feeling the familiar stiffness of night's rest, and stretched, letting her body wake with careful precision. The streets below were waking too, dust swirling in the soft sunlight, horses shifting their weight, and distant voices murmuring greetings or instructions. Martha paused at the window of the crib, letting the quiet town fill her senses. Each sound, each movement, was a subtle reminder that life continued, that planning, patience, and careful attention were the true weapons in the fight for survival. In the back room, Suddy gathered the women once again, her presence steady and grounding, her voice a gentle, commanding cadence. "Today," she said softly, "we build more than defense. We build the foundation of respect, the ties that bind the town to us, the quiet strength that cannot be shaken by threats or fear." Martha watched the room absorb her words, seeing the understanding grow like slow-burning embers. Every woman nodded quietly, their hearts aligned with the rhythm of preparation, their minds focused on steps carefully measured, deliberate, precise. As the sun leaned toward the horizon, Edward Hayes arrived quietly at the crib. His footsteps were light, and his eyes carried the careful calculation of a man accustomed to subtlety. He shared whispers from the town council, soft rumors, shifts in loyalty, and careful hints of Holcomb's next moves. Martha listened, pen in hand, translating the quiet words into actionable strategies. Her mind moved with deliberate focus, weaving together alliances, letters, and small, precise actions. Edward's presence was reassuring, a bridge between the crib and the broader town, reminding Martha that vigilance combined with intelligence was a path toward enduring influence. The evening settled in slow waves over Silver Creek, painting rooftops and streets in amber and violet. Inside the crib, the women moved with gentle purpose, folding linens, tending fires, and sharing quiet laughter that floated softly through the room. Martha moved among them, checking notes, tidying ledgers, her presence calm, deliberate, grounding. Each small act, folding a sheet, lighting a candle, placing coins in the ledger, felt like a ritual, a way to assert quiet control over the fragile world around them. The day's quiet victories, the letters drafted, the alliances reinforced, all settled into the room like a soft blanket, bringing a deep sense of calm and a steady, patient anticipation of what tomorrow would bring. Night descended fully, wrapping Silver Creek in a blanket of deep indigo and shimmering stars. Martha stood at the window, looking out over the sleeping town, listening to the soft hum of life continuing despite uncertainty. Her thoughts traced the events of the day, the whispered plans, the cautious movements, and the subtle victories achieved in silence. A quiet courage settled into her chest, not born of denial of danger, but from understanding the rhythm of the town, the strength of solidarity, and the patience required to endure. She closed her eyes, the soft pulse of Silver Creek's life, lulling her toward sleep, her mind and heart steady, ready for the challenges and triumphs of the days yet to come. The soft light of morning spread across Silver Creek, turning the rooftops to burnished gold and the dusty streets to warm amber. Martha rose slowly from her cot, feeling the quiet weight of responsibility settle gently on her shoulders. The crib was still, the soft breathing of the women a gentle hum that matched the rhythm of the town itself. She moved to the window, watching as the blacksmith struck his anvil in measured, rhythmic strikes, and as the horses shifted in the corral, their hooves stirring small clouds of dust that danced in the sunlight. Even amidst uncertainty, there was calm, a gentle reminder that life continued, and that preparation, patience, and careful observation were the quiet forms of power they wielded each day. In the back room, Sati gathered the women, her presence steady, unshakable, like the old mountains surrounding the town. "We will not act rashly," she said softly, "but we will act with precision. Every letter, every visit, every small decision must serve our long-term survival and influence." The women nodded, absorbing each word, each pause. Martha felt the quiet weight of strategy pressing into her mind, transforming fear into thoughtful planning, and subtle threats into opportunities for careful, deliberate action. Even the soft rustle of papers and the faint hum of conversation became part of the rhythm of their preparation, a slow, soothing cadence that anchored them against uncertainty. As the sun climbed higher, Edward Hayes arrived at the crib, his steps soft against the wooden porch. He carried news of small movements in the town council, rumors of shifting loyalties, and subtle hints of Holcomb's intentions. Martha welcomed him quietly, her eyes calm and attentive, inviting him to the corner of the room where ledgers and letters awaited. Their conversation was a river of soft, deliberate words, each carefully measured, each carrying the weight of strategy and trust. When Edward left, Martha remained by the window, watching the town below, feeling the slow pulse of resolve steady in her chest, a calm before the next steps of planning. The afternoon stretched gently across the town, soft light washing over Silver Creek in warm, golden tones. Inside the crib, the women moved in harmonious rhythm, folding linens, checking ledgers, tending the small comforts that made the crib a home. Martha walked among them, offering guidance with soft words, her presence a quiet anchor in the ebb and flow of tasks. Even the simple acts, folding a sheet, counting coins, arranging letters, became rituals of preparation, subtle demonstrations of the control and care that would define their influence in the town. Through quiet labor and gentle coordination, they strengthened not just the crib, but the bonds between them and the foundations of their place in Silver Creek. As evening fell, painting the town in deep violet and amber, Martha returned to her room, the soft glow of candlelight casting dancing shadows on the walls. She sat by the window, watching Silver Creek settle into quiet repose, the streets empty, the distant hum of life fading into calm. Her thoughts drifted across the past days, the letters, the whispered plans, the careful observations, and the small victories achieved in silence. A sense of quiet courage settled over her, not from denial of danger, but from understanding, patience, and the strength of solidarity. She closed her eyes, letting the gentle rhythm of the town carry her toward sleep, knowing that tomorrow they would endure, they would plan, and they would continue to carve their place in Silver Creek. Morning arrived gently, the sky painted in pale pinks and soft oranges. Martha rose with the rhythm of the town, her feet brushing the worn wooden floorboards as she moved toward the window. From her perch above the street, she could see the faint stirring of life, a horse shifting its weight in the corral, a cart creaking slowly along the dusty street, the distant hum of miners heading toward their work. She took a slow, deep breath, feeling the crisp mountain air fill her lungs. There was calm in the simplicity of these movements, a reminder that even in a town shadowed by threats, life continued steadily, patiently, deliberately. In the back room, Sati gathered the women around a worn wooden table, papers and ledgers spread before them like maps of a quiet battlefield. Every action, Sati murmured softly, must serve our survival, our influence, and our reputation. The town watches every move, and we must guide the rhythm of their perception with care. Martha listened closely, absorbing the nuances of strategy, the unspoken lessons of patience and timing. Each woman nodded in quiet understanding, their collective presence a shield against uncertainty, their calm resolve a testament to the strength they had cultivated together. Edward Hayes arrived quietly at the crib, his steps careful and deliberate, carrying news from the town council, rumors of subtle shifts, and glimpses of Holcomb's intentions. Martha welcomed him, her gaze steady, her voice soft yet attentive. They spoke in whispers, words flowing like gentle streams, each carrying weight and intention, each forming strands of a larger plan. When Edward departed, Martha lingered at the window, watching the town move in slow, purposeful rhythm. The pulse of Silver Creek was a lullaby of life and quiet strategy, a subtle hum that infused her with resolve. The afternoon light filled the crib with a golden glow, dust motes drifting lazily in sunbeams that touched worn furniture and cracked mirrors. The women moved with quiet precision, Pearl tending small garden boxes, Charlotte repairing garments, Daisy organizing ledgers and letters. Martha moved among them, offering guidance, her presence calm and steady, her mind attuned to the rhythm of tasks and the subtle undercurrents of the town. Each small act, folding, counting, writing, speaking softly, was part of a deliberate practice, a ritual that strengthened their bonds, their influence, and their quiet claim to respect within Silver Creek. As night settled over Silver Creek, stars began to pierce the deep indigo sky, casting soft light across rooftops and streets. Martha sat by the window of the crib, candlelight flickering gently across her face. Her thoughts wandered across the day's events. Letters sent, alliances reinforced, subtle victories quietly achieved. A calm courage filled her chest, not the kind born of ignorance, but of understanding, patience, and steadfast determination. She closed her eyes, letting the gentle rhythm of Silver Creek carry her toward sleep, knowing that tomorrow they would endure, they would plan, and they would continue to shape the town, quietly, deliberately, and with unwavering resolve. Morning arrived with a tender hush, soft sunlight filtering through the wooden shutters, casting gentle lines across the dusty floorboards. Martha stirred slowly, her body stretching into wakefulness, the familiar creak of the crib beneath her feet grounding her in the quiet rhythm of life. Outside, the town yawned awake, horses shifted in their stalls, a cart rolled slowly along the street, and distant voices whispered greetings in the soft mountain air. Martha's gaze lingered on the streets below, absorbing the subtle patterns of movement, the ebb and flow of daily life, reminding herself that patience and observation were as powerful as any action she could take. In the back room, Suddy gathered the women once more, her presence calm, her voice carrying a quiet authority. Every letter, every conversation, every small decision, she said softly, is a step in the larger dance of survival. Do not rush. Do not act without thought. The town watches, and we must guide their perception with careful, deliberate action. Martha listened, her mind absorbing the cadence of strategy, her heart steady with the reassurance of purpose. The women nodded quietly, each one aware that calm, patient planning was the foundation of their enduring influence in Silver Creek. As the sun leaned toward the horizon, Edward Hayes arrived at the crib, moving with careful steps, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of fading light. He brought news of council meetings, rumors of shifting alliances, and the subtle movements of Holcomb's plans. Martha greeted him quietly, their conversation low and deliberate, each word carrying weight, each pause filled with unspoken understanding. When Edward left, Martha lingered at the window, watching the town slowly settle into evening calm, feeling the quiet pulse of resolve in her chest, a gentle reassurance that patience and observation were powerful tools indeed. The afternoon stretched lazily across the crib, golden sunlight spilling through windows and reflecting on worn wooden floors. Inside, the women moved with quiet grace, folding linens, tending fires, organizing ledgers, and sharing moments of soft laughter that drifted through the room like a gentle breeze. Martha moved among them, offering guidance with soft words, her presence a steady anchor in the flow of their activities. Each small act, tidying, counting, writing, speaking gently, was a ritual reinforcing their bonds, their influence, and their quiet claim to respect in the town outside. Even in the ordinary, there was power, and each woman felt it, steady and reassuring, as a slow, soothing heartbeat beneath the rhythm of daily life. As night fell, Silver Creek exhaled into calm, stars appearing one by one in the deep indigo sky. Martha returned to her room, candlelight flickering softly across worn furniture. She sat at the window, watching the town sink into quiet repose, the streets empty, the distant murmur of life fading into peace. Her thoughts drifted over the day. Small victories, letters sent, subtle maneuvers, quiet alliances. A gentle courage filled her chest, not the sort born of ignorance of danger, but of understanding, patience, and shared strength. She closed her eyes, letting Silver Creek's slow rhythm carry her toward sleep, knowing that tomorrow they would endure, they would act with purpose, and the crib's presence in the town would continue to grow quietly and steadily. The first light of morning crept gently over Silver Creek, casting soft amber streaks across dusty streets and wooden rooftops. Martha stirred in her cot, stretching slowly as the warmth of day seeped into the room. The crib was quiet, the soft breathing of the women blending with the faint whisper of the wind outside. From her window perch, she observed the town awakening, horses shifting in their stalls, blacksmiths' hammers ringing softly in measured rhythm, and miners slowly making their way toward the distant shafts. Each subtle movement, each faint sound, reminded her that the pulse of the town was steady, and that their influence, patient and deliberate, was slowly weaving into the very fabric of Silver Creek. In the back room, Suddy gathered the women around a worn wooden table, her presence calm, measured, and unwavering. Patience, she murmured softly, is as important as action. Every conversation, every ledger entry, every subtle word is a thread in the fabric we are weaving. Do not rush, do not force. Let the town's rhythm guide our choices, and we will grow stronger in silence than others in noise. Martha listened carefully, absorbing the wisdom in every pause, every word. She felt a quiet, steady determination settling in her chest, a reminder that influence was not always loud, but often gentle, persistent, and deliberate. As evening approached, Edward Hayes arrived quietly at the crib, his footsteps soft against the wooden porch. He carried subtle tidings from the town council, rumors of shifting allegiances, small hints of Holcomb's next moves, and the quiet stirrings of influence elsewhere in the town. Martha welcomed him with calm attentiveness, listening as he spoke in hushed tones, her mind weaving each word into strategy, each pause into a plan. When Edward departed, Martha lingered at the window, watching Silver Creek settle into the gentle quiet of night, feeling a steady pulse of resolve, a reminder that patience and observation were powerful allies. The afternoon sun filtered softly through the windows of the crib, dust motes drifting lazily in the golden light. The women moved with quiet precision, Pearl tending small garden boxes, Charlotte mending garments, Daisy arranging ledgers and letters. Martha walked among them, offering guidance in gentle tones, her presence steady and reassuring, her mind attuned to both the rhythm of tasks and the quiet currents of the town beyond. Every small act, tidying, counting, writing, speaking softly, was a ritual of preparation and influence, a way to shape the crib's standing in the town, without drawing unnecessary attention, a slow, deliberate assertion of presence and care. As night embraced Silver Creek, stars emerged one by one in the deep indigo sky, casting soft light over quiet streets and rooftops. Martha returned to her room, candlelight flickering across worn floors and simple furnishings. She sat by the window, watching the town settle into stillness, the distant hum of life fading into a calm lullaby. Her thoughts wandered across the day, subtle victories, letters sent, alliances strengthened, and the quiet work of shaping influence, of preparing for challenges yet to come. A gentle, steadfast courage filled her chest, not born of ignorance, but of patience, understanding, and the strength of solidarity. She closed her eyes, letting the soft pulse of Silver Creek carry her towards sleep, knowing that tomorrow, their quiet endurance and deliberate care would continue to weave the crib into the town's heart. The morning arrived gently over Silver Creek, soft golden light spilling across the rooftops, casting long, tender shadows on the dusty streets. Martha woke slowly, feeling the familiar warmth of the crib around her, the soft breathing of the women blending with the faint rustle of leaves outside. She moved quietly to the window, watching the town begin its measured stir. A cart creaking along the street, miners moving toward the shafts, and the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer. Even amidst the small tensions that lingered in town, there was calm, a rhythm of life that whispered patience and reminded her that steady observation was the quietest form of influence. In the back room, Suddy gathered the women once again, her presence as steady and grounding as the mountains surrounding Silver Creek. "Every word, every act, every small gesture," she said softly, "is part of a larger plan. Let us move with purpose, but also with patience. Influence grows slowly, like the roots of a tree, quietly, steadily, beneath notice, until it becomes unshakable." Martha listened, feeling the steady reassurance in Suddy's calm voice, absorbing the subtle lessons of strategy, of patience, of deliberate action. Each woman nodded quietly, their collective focus a quiet shield against uncertainty. As the sun began its descent, Edward Hayes arrived at the crib, his footsteps soft, measured, almost imperceptible. He brought news of the town council, shifts in alliances, and the faint outlines of Holcomb's next maneuvers. Martha welcomed him calmly, their conversation flowing in gentle, deliberate tones, words carefully weighed, each carrying intention, each forming strands of a quiet plan. When Edward left, Martha lingered at the window, watching Silver Creek streets settle into evening calm, feeling a steady pulse of confidence, a quiet knowledge that patience and observation were as powerful as action. The afternoon sun warmed the crib, casting golden light across worn floors and simple furnishings. The women moved with gentle precision, Pearl tending the small garden boxes, Charlotte repairing garments with nimble hands, Daisy arranging ledgers and letters, all while sharing soft laughter that floated like music through the room. Martha moved among them, offering guidance, her presence steady, grounding, and reassuring. Every small act, tidying, counting, writing, speaking gently, was a ritual of influence, a way to shape the crib's standing in the town. Without loud assertion, a slow, deliberate weaving of respect and care. As night fell over Silver Creek, stars appeared, one by one, in the deep indigo sky, casting silver light on the quiet streets and rooftops. Martha returned to her room, candlelight flickering softly across the walls. She sat at the window, watching the town settle into a gentle stillness, the distant hum of life fading into calm. Her thoughts reflected on the days past, the subtle victories, the letters sent, the alliances quietly strengthened, and the slow, deliberate work of shaping influence. Within the town's rhythm, a gentle courage filled her chest, not from ignorance of danger, but from understanding, patience, and the strength of solidarity. She closed her eyes, letting the pulse of Silver Creek lull her into sleep, knowing that the crib, the women, and their quiet, steady actions had woven themselves into the heart of the town, and that their influence, patient and deliberate, would endure quietly, steadily, and with lasting strength. As the night deepened over Silver Creek, the soft glow of the crib's candlelight flickered gently, casting long, peaceful shadows across the worn wooden floors. Martha sat quietly by the window, watching the town settle into calm, the distant hum of life fading into a gentle lullaby. She thought of the days past, The letters sent, the alliances nurtured, the subtle victories quietly achieved, and the gentle power of patience, understanding, and solidarity. The crib, the women, and their careful, deliberate actions had quietly woven themselves into the heart of the town. Their influence, though subtle, was enduring, a testament to resilience, courage, and quiet leadership. And now, as you rest and let your thoughts drift, remember the power of patience, the quiet strength found in community, and the gentle rhythm of life unfolding slowly, steadily, peacefully. If you found this story calming and inspiring, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to join us on more journeys into the hidden histories of the past. Sleep well, and let the gentle stories of Silver Creek carry you into a night of calm and restful dreams.